The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as a tired woman sat on her couch, staring at the mess in her kitchen. Her name wasn't important right now, but what mattered was that she had spent years juggling life, working, long hours raising two kids and trying to keep her small house from falling apart. Life hadn't been easy for her, especially after her divorce 5 years ago. But tonight it wasn't emotional baggage weighing her down. It was something much simpler, yet equally frustrating. Plumbing. Her kitchen sink was clogged again. Water pooled on the floor beneath it, spreading slowly across the tiles like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. She sighed deeply, running her fingers through her hair. This wasn't the first time this month. It felt like every other week, something in her house decided to break. And tonight, with piles of dishes waiting to be washed and no way to clean them, she knew she couldn't put off calling a plumber any longer. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for a local plumbing service. When the dispatcher answered, she hesitated before speaking. "Hi, I need someone to fix my sink," she said, sounding more exhausted than she intended. The person on the other end asked if she preferred a specific time slot. She thought about it for a moment. Normally she'd choose daytime appointments when her kids were at school, but today, work had kept her busy until late evening. "I guess I'll take whoever can come tonight," she replied reluctantly. Having strangers in her house after dark made her uneasy, but desperate times called for desperate measures. After confirming the details, she hung up and leaned back against the couch, letting out another sigh. What else could go wrong? An hour later, just as twilight settled over the neighborhood, headlights illuminated her driveway. A black sedan pulled in, parking neatly beside her car. Out stepped a tall man wearing jeans and a plain blue shirt tucked into his belt. His tool belt clinked softly as he walked toward the door. He looked younger than she expected. Not in a boyish way, but youthful enough to make her wonder how experienced he really was. He knocked gently, and she opened the door, forcing a polite smile. "Hi, are you here for the sink?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice smooth and respectful. "I'll get it sorted out for you." Something about him caught her attention immediately. Maybe it was the calmness in his tone or the confidence in the way he carried himself. Whatever it was, it stood out. She led him to the kitchen, explaining the problem while pointing at the overflowing sink. As he knelt down to inspect it, she noticed his hands, strong, capable, and steady. They moved with precision, examining pipes and tightening connections without hesitation. Curiosity got the better of her, and she found herself asking questions. "How old are you?" The word slipped out before she could stop herself. It wasn't exactly polite, but there was something about him that intrigued her. He glanced up briefly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. 35, he replied. "Why, do I look younger?" She blinked, surprised by his answer. 35. That meant he was only 10 years younger than her. Somehow she'd imagined him being closer to her son's age. Time really did fly, she thought to herself. Shaking her head slightly, she muttered, "No, you don't look young. I just didn't expect someone your age doing this kind of work." He chuckled softly, returning his focus to the sink. "Well, I've been doing this for a while now. Learned it from my dad." There was a warmth in his voice when he mentioned his father, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration. People who worked hard always earned her respect. Still, as he continued fixing the pipe, she found her gaze lingering on him longer than necessary. There was something magnetic about the way he handled tools, the way he seemed completely absorbed in his task. Before she realized it, the words tumbled out of her mouth. "You know," she started, then paused, unsure if she should finish the sentence. But it was too late to turn back now. "If I were your age, I'd invite you in for coffee." The room fell silent for a moment. He stopped working and looked up at her, clearly taken aback. For a brief second she regretted saying anything at all. Had she crossed a line? Was this inappropriate? But then, to her relief, he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Maybe next time," he said lightly, his tone teasing, but not dismissive. Her cheeks flushed slightly, embarrassed by her boldness. Yet despite the awkwardness, she couldn't deny the spark of connection between them. When he finally finished the job and packed up his tools, she thanked him sincerely, watching as he walked out the door. Little did she know that simple comment would linger in both their minds long after he left. As she closed the door behind him, she leaned against it, replaying the conversation in her head. Why had she said that? Was it loneliness talking? Or was there something more to it? Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. This encounter had stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The man finished tightening the last bolt under the sink, standing up and wiping his hands on a cloth. He glanced at her, his expression calm but with a hint of curiosity. She could tell he was still thinking about what she'd said earlier. That comment about inviting him in for coffee if she were younger. It hung in the air between them like an unspoken question, neither awkward nor entirely comfortable. She quickly tried to change the subject, pointing to the now functioning sink. "Looks like you saved the day," she said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for coming out so late." He nodded, tucking the wrench back into his tool belt. "No problem, that's what I'm here for." His voice was steady, but there was a playful glint in his eyes as he added, "And hey, who says age matters when it comes to coffee?" Her breath caught for a moment. Was he teasing her, or was he actually interested? She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty made her heartbeat quicken just a little. She laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, maybe next time I'll be brave enough to follow through on that offer," she replied, trying to sound casual. He smiled again, this time wider, and she noticed how warm it was. Genuine, not forced. "I'll hold you to that," he said before turning toward the door. As he stepped outside, he gave her a small wave. "Take care, and don't hesitate to call if anything else breaks." She watched him walk to his car, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. Relief because the encounter was over, and regret because, well, she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because she hadn't expected their conversation to leave such an impression on her. She closed the door softly, leaning against it for a moment as her mind replayed every word they'd exchanged. Later that night, lying in bed, she found herself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept drifting back to him. The way he moved with confidence, the kindness in his voice, the easygoing way he handled her odd comment about coffee. She wondered what he thought of her. Did he think she was silly for saying something like that, or did he find it amusing, maybe even flattering? She shook her head, frustrated with herself. Why was she overthinking this? It wasn't like she'd done anything wrong. People joked around all the time, right? Still, there was something about him that felt different from anyone else she'd met recently. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't treat her like a customer. He treated her like a person. He listened when she spoke, responded thoughtfully, and never once acted like he was in a rush to leave. In her experience, that kind of attention was rare. The next morning, as she sipped her coffee and scrolled through social media, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text message from the plumbing company confirming the repair and thanking her for choosing their services. Attached to the message was a note. "If you ever need us again, feel free to ask for me specifically. Have a great day." Her heart skipped a beat. It was subtle, but it felt personal, like he remembered their conversation and wanted to keep the door open for future interaction. She stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure whether to feel flattered or cautious. On one hand, it was nice to know someone had taken the time to send a friendly follow-up. On the other hand, she worried she might be reading too much into it. Still, the thought lingered in her mind throughout the day. At work, during meetings, even while picking up groceries, snippets of their conversation replayed in her head. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to sit down with him over coffee, talking about things beyond sinks and pipes. Would he be as engaging outside of work as he was on the job? Did he have hobbies, dreams, stories worth hearing? The more she thought about it, the more curious she became. A few days later, disaster struck again. This time it wasn't the kitchen sink, it was the shower in the bathroom. matter how hard she turned the knobs, water refused to drain properly. Frustrated, she called the plumbing company once more, hoping against hope that the same guy would answer the call. When he arrived later that evening, wearing the same confident smile, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. "Back. Already?" he teased as he walked in carrying his toolbox. "You must really love having me around." She laughed, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "Don't get too full of yourself. My plumbing hates me, that's all." He grinned, setting his tools down near the bathtub. "Well, lucky for you, I'm here to save the day, again." As he worked, they fell into an easy rhythm of conversation. This time, she didn't hold back her curiosity. She asked him about his background, where he grew up, and how he ended up in the plumbing business. To her surprise, he opened up willingly, sharing bits and pieces of his life. He told her about growing up in a big family, learning the trade from his father, and moving to the area for better opportunities. There was a sincerity in his words that resonated with her, making her realize how much they had in common despite their differences. At one point, while adjusting a pipe, he looked up at her and said, "You know, most people don't stick around to chat while I'm working. They usually disappear until I'm done." "I guess I'm not most people," she replied, smiling. "Besides, it's nice to talk to someone who actually listens." Their eyes met briefly, and for a split second time seemed to stand still. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar yet comforting. It wasn't just attraction, though she couldn't deny that played a part, but something deeper. A connection. For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen by another person. When he finally finished the repair, he stood up and stretched, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "So," he began, his tone light but meaningful, "about that coffee." Her stomach flipped and she hesitated for a moment. Was he serious, or was this just friendly banter? Either way, she decided to take a chance. "I suppose I owe you one," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "How about this weekend?" He smiled, clearly pleased. "Sounds like a plan." As he packed up his tools and headed out the door, she felt a surge of nervous energy. Had she just agreed to go on a date with a stranger? Technically, yes, but he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Over the past few days, he had become someone she genuinely enjoyed talking to, someone who made her laugh and forget about her worries, even if only for a little while. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something important. Life doesn't always give you second chances, but when it does, you shouldn't let fear stop you from taking them. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to see where this unexpected connection might lead. The weekend arrived faster than she expected, and with it came a mix of excitement and nerves. She hadn't been on a casual outing like this in years, not since her divorce, and the idea of sitting across from someone new felt both thrilling and terrifying. What would they talk about? Would there be awkward silences? Most importantly, was she reading too much into this whole thing? She spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. Nothing too fancy. She didn't want to seem like she was trying too hard, but not too casual either. After rummaging through her closet, she settled on a simple blouse and jeans, pairing it with comfortable shoes. "This is just coffee," she reminded herself as she checked her reflection one last time. Nothing serious. When she arrived at the cafe, he was already there, waiting near the entrance. He looked different out of his work clothes, clean-cut, relaxed, and surprisingly handsome in a plain gray sweater. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile that immediately put her at ease. "You made it," he said warmly, opening the door for her. "I was starting to think you might bail." "Not a chance," she replied, returning his smile. "Though I did consider running away a few times earlier today," he laughed, leading her inside. The cafe was cozy, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. They found a quiet corner table by the window, where sunlight streamed in, casting golden patterns on the wooden surface. As they sat down, she noticed how effortlessly he carried himself. Even something as simple as ordering coffee seemed natural with him. They started talking almost immediately, skipping over small talk and diving straight into deeper topics. Somehow their conversation flowed as easily as it had during their previous meetings, but this time it felt more personal. He told her about his love for music, how he played guitar in his spare time and often performed at local open mic nights. She shared stories about raising her kids, the challenges and joys of being a single parent, and how she sometimes struggled to find balance between work and family. There were moments when their laughter filled the space around them, drawing curious glances from other customers. But there were also quieter moments when their words slowed and they simply listened to each other. She found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing thoughts and feelings she usually kept, tucked away. It was refreshing, and a little scary, to let someone see parts of her she rarely showed to others. At one point, leaning back in his chair, he asked, "Do you ever feel like life is moving too fast? Like no matter how hard you try, you can't keep up?" She nodded slowly, surprised by how well he understood. "All the time," she admitted. "Some days I wake up and wonder if I'm doing enough for my kids, for myself, for anyone. And then I remember I'm only human." He smiled softly, his gaze steady. "That's the thing, though. Being human means we're allowed to stumble. We don't have to have everything figured out." His words stayed with her long after the moment passed. There was wisdom in what he said, but also comfort. For so long she'd carried the weight of responsibility alone, afraid to lean on anyone else. Sitting here now, talking to him, she realized how much she craved connection, not just romantic but emotional. Someone who could remind her that it was okay to be imperfect. As the afternoon wore on, the cafe grew busier, but neither of them seemed to notice. Time slipped away unnoticed, replaced by the rhythm of their conversation. Eventually, the barista announced they were closing soon, forcing them to reluctantly wrap things up. Outside, the air had turned cooler, and the sky was painted in hues of pink and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. "I had a great time," she said honestly, tucking her hands into her pockets to ward off the chill. "Thanks for suggesting this." "Me too," he replied, his voice warm. "We should do it again sometime. Maybe dinner next time?" Her heart skipped a beat. Dinner sounded like a step forward, a shift from casual to something more intentional. Part of her wanted to say yes right away, but another part, the cautious, guarded side, held back. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'd like that," she finally said, choosing honesty over hesitation. "But I'll admit, I'm a little nervous. I haven't done this in a long time." He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Take your time," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Those 4 words lingered in her mind as they parted ways. Take your time. It wasn't pressure or expectation. It was permission. Permission to move at her own pace, to figure things out without rushing. For the first time in years, she felt like she had room to breathe. Walking home, she replayed the day in her head, savoring every detail. The way he laughed at her jokes, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke, the way he made her feel heard and valued. It wasn't perfect, they barely knew each other after all, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. Back at her house, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky. Her thoughts drifted to the future, uncertain yet full of possibility. Whatever happened, next she knew one thing for sure. She didn't want to close herself off anymore. Life had given her a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. The days following their coffee date felt different, lighter somehow. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a shift in the air, an unspoken understanding between them that things were no longer just casual. It wasn't just about fixing pipes or exchanging pleasantries anymore. Something deeper had taken root, and neither of them could ignore it. At first, she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than gratitude. After all, he'd been helpful, kind, and easy to talk to. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The way her heart raced when his name popped up on her phone, the anticipation she felt whenever they made plans. It wasn't normal for someone she barely knew. Or maybe barely wasn't the right word anymore. They weren't strangers, not really. Not after hours of talking, laughing, and sharing pieces of themselves that even close friends didn't always see. Still, doubts crept in. Was she moving too fast? Was she setting herself up for disappointment by letting herself hope for something real? Her mind buzzed with questions, but every time she looked at him, those worries faded into the background. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, confident yet humble, that made her feel safe. Safe enough to take a risk. Their next meeting came sooner than expected. A pipe burst in the basement late one night, flooding part of the floor and leaving her panicked. Without hesitation, she called the plumbing company, half expecting a recording or an automated message. To her surprise, he answered almost immediately. "Hey," he said, his voice calm despite the hour. "What's wrong?" She explained the situation quickly, trying to keep her tone steady even as water pooled around her feet. "I know it's late," she added apologetically, "but I didn't know who else to call." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he replied without missing a beat. "Don't worry, I've got this." When he arrived, dressed in jeans and a hoodie instead of his usual work uniform, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. He stepped inside, taking in the chaos with a practiced eye. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "let's get this sorted out." For the next hour they worked side by side, he repairing the pipe while she mopped up the mess. Despite the stress of the situation, there was an odd sense of teamwork between them. Every now and then he'd crack a joke to lighten the mood, making her laugh even as she wrung out soggy towels. When the water finally stopped gushing and the basement began to dry, she sank onto the stairs, exhausted but grateful. "You saved me again," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled, sitting down beside her. "Well, lucky for you, I'm pretty hard to get rid of." They sat there for a moment, catching their breath, the sound of dripping water slowly fading into the background. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, though her heart was racing, not from fear this time, but from something else entirely. Something she hadn't felt in years. "Yeah," she whispered. "I am." As the weeks went by, their connection deepened. They spent more time together outside of work-related emergencies, exploring parts of the town neither of them had visited before. One Saturday afternoon, he suggested visiting a local farmer's market she'd never heard of. "Trust me," he said, grinning. "It's worth it." And he was right. The market was bustling with life. Vendors selling fresh produce, handmade crafts, and delicious-smelling baked goods. As they wandered through the stalls, he introduced her to people he knew, chatting easily with vendors and sampling everything from honey to homemade jam. Watching him interact with others, she realized how much he loved connecting with people. It wasn't just her he cared about, it was everyone around him. "You're such a people person," she teased as they sat on a bench, sharing a paper cone filled with roasted almonds. "How do you know so many people here?" He shrugged, smiling. "I've lived here long enough to make friends. Besides, most people are nice once you give them a chance." His words stuck with her. Over the years, she'd become guarded, hesitant to let new people into her life. But being with him reminded her of the joy that came from opening up, from trusting others and letting them in. It was scary, yes, but also freeing. One evening, as they drove home from dinner, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" he said, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. "Sure," she replied, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Do you ever think about us? Like, where we're headed?" Her stomach flipped. She hadn't expected him to bring it up so directly, but she appreciated his honesty. "Yeah," she admitted. "I do. Sometimes it scares me, though. We're still figuring things out, you know?" He nodded, understanding completely. "I get that, and I don't want to rush you or push you into anything you're not ready for, but I can't help thinking about it. About us." She looked out the window, watching streetlights blur past. "It's not just about timing," she said softly. "It's about everything. The age difference, my kids, what other people might think. I don't want to mess this up." He reached over, placing a hand on hers. "We'll figure it out together," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." His confidence gave her strength, but it didn't erase her fears entirely. That night, lying in bed, she replayed their conversation in her mind. Was she ready for this? Could they really build something lasting despite the challenges? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. She wanted to try. The next morning, she woke up determined to take things one step further. Instead of waiting for him to reach out, she sent him a text inviting him over for lunch. When he arrived carrying a bag of groceries and a bouquet of wildflowers, she greeted him with a nervous smile. "I thought maybe we could cook something together," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "You know, like a team effort." He grinned, stepping inside. "Sounds fun. What are we making?" "Something simple," she replied, pulling ingredients out of the fridge. "Pasta and salad. Nothing fancy." As they cooked, laughter filled the room. He teased her about her knife skills while she playfully accused him of sneaking bites of cheese. By the time the meal was ready, they were both covered in flour and giggling like teenagers. Sitting down at the table, plates steaming in front of them, she raised her glass of water in a mock toast. "To teamwork," she said, smiling. "To second chances," he added, clinking his glass against hers. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of shared food and laughter, she realized something important. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about finding someone who saw your imperfections and chose to stay anyway. Someone who stood by you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And as they ate together, talking about everything and nothing, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship grew in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a casual coffee date blossomed into something deeper, a friendship that felt more like a partnership. They began spending more time together, not just meeting for meals or quick outings, but sharing pieces of their lives in between. Text messages became a regular part of her day, brightening even the busiest moments with a simple, "How's your day going?" or "Thinking about you." At first she was cautious, not because he gave her any reason to be, but because she hadn't let anyone get this close in years. Trust didn't come easily to her, especially after the heartache of her past. But he was patient, never pushing too hard or expecting too much. Instead, he showed up consistently, proving through his actions that he cared. Whether it was helping her carry groceries inside after a long day or simply listening when she needed to vent, he made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, she found herself opening up about things she rarely talked about. The loneliness she'd felt after her divorce, the pressure of raising 2 kids on her own, the fear of starting over again. It wasn't easy to share these parts of herself, but there was something about him that made her feel safe. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, or offering a quiet word of encouragement when she paused. When she finished, he looked at her thoughtfully before speaking. "You've been carrying so much by yourself," he said softly. "But you don't have to anymore. Let me help." His words caught her off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because they struck a chord deep inside her. For so long, she'd believed she had to handle everything alone, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But sitting there with him, she realized how wrong she'd been. Strength wasn't about doing it all on your own. It was about knowing when to lean on someone else. Still, doubts lingered. Their age difference, while not huge, sometimes weighed on her mind. She worried about what others might think, friends, family, even strangers who didn't know their story. Would they judge her? Would they assume she was making a mistake? And then there was the practical side of things. Where would this lead? Could they really build something lasting together? He sensed her hesitation and gently reassured her one evening as they strolled through the park. The air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath their feet as golden sunlight filtered through the trees. "I know we're figuring this out as we go," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't expect us to have all the answers right now. But what I do know is that I care about you, and I want to see where this goes." She smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. "It's not that I don't care about you two," she replied, "but I guess I'm scared of getting hurt again." He nodded, understanding completely. "We can take it slow," he said. "No pressure, no rush, just let's keep moving forward, okay?" That conversation marked a turning point for her. Slowly but surely, she began letting go of her fears, allowing herself to trust him, and herself, a little more each day. They continued building their connection, finding joy in the small, everyday moments. Cooking dinner together in her kitchen, laughing over silly jokes, taking long drives with no destination in mind. It was these little things that made their bond stronger. But life isn't always smooth sailing, and challenges inevitably arose. One evening, during a family gathering, her sister pulled her aside and asked pointedly, "Are you sure about this? He seems nice, but isn't he a bit younger than you?" Her tone wasn't unkind, but it carried an edge of concern. For a moment, she felt defensive. Who was her sister to question her choices? But then she remembered how she'd once doubted herself too. Taking a deep breath, she responded calmly, "Age doesn't define us. What matters is how we treat each other, and he treats me better than anyone ever has." Her sister studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "If he makes you happy, then that's what counts." Those words stayed with her, reinforcing what she already knew in her heart. Love isn't about perfection or ticking boxes. It's about finding someone who sees you for who you are and chooses to stay anyway. As the seasons changed, so did they. They grew closer, learning more about each other's quirks and habits, dreams and fears. There were disagreements, of course, moments when misunderstandings flared or expectations clashed, but they worked through them together, always choosing communication over silence. One chilly autumn evening, as they walked hand in hand through the park, he stopped suddenly and turned to face her. His expression was serious yet tender, and she could tell something important was coming. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know we've taken our time getting here, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. In that instant, she understood that true love isn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It's about finding someone who stands beside you, through thick and thin, and makes every step of the journey worthwhile. Together, they stepped into the future, ready to face whatever came next. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change, growth, and discovery. Their relationship had shifted from something tentative into something solid, something real. They weren't just two people sharing coffee or dinner anymore. They were partners in every sense of the word. He became a steady presence in her life, someone she could count on when things got tough. Whether it was fixing a leaky faucet or offering a shoulder to cry on after a rough day at work, he showed up without fail. Her kids noticed the difference too. At first they were skeptical. What kid wouldn't be wary of seeing their mom with someone new? But over time they warmed up to him. It helped that he didn't try too hard. Instead of forcing himself into their lives, he let them set the pace. He'd crack jokes during family dinners, teach them card tricks, or join them for movie nights. Slowly but surely, he earned their trust, becoming not just her partner, but also a part of their little family. One Saturday morning, as they sat around the kitchen table eating pancakes, her youngest blurted out, "You know, you're kinda cool for an adult." Everyone burst into laughter, including him. "Thanks," he replied with a grin. "That's high praise coming from you." It was moments like these that made her realize how far they'd come. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, chores to do, and challenges to face. But it felt lighter somehow. Having someone to share the load made all the difference as, winter approached. They decided to take a short trip together. Neither of them had been away from home in ages, and the idea of escaping the daily grind sounded appealing. They rented a small cabin nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and snow-covered trails. The air was crisp, and the world outside seemed almost magical, blanketed in white. On their second night there, they bundled up and stepped outside to watch the stars. The sky was clear, dotted with countless twinkling lights. She leaned against him for warmth, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply exist in the quiet beauty of the moment. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you ever think about where we started?" he asked softly. "I mean, who would have thought we'd end up here?" She smiled, tilting her head back to look at him. "Honestly, I don't think I even knew what here was supposed to feel like until now." He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Me neither. But I'm glad we figured it out." Her heart swelled with gratitude. This man, this kind, patient, funny man, had walked into her life unexpectedly and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. He hadn't tried to fix her or change her. Instead, he'd accepted her exactly as she was, flaws and all. And in return, she'd learned to do the same for him. Back home, life continued its usual rhythm, but with a newfound sense of balance. She found herself smiling more often, laughing louder, and worrying less. Even the little annoyances, a clogged drain, a flat tire, a hectic day at work, felt easier to handle because she wasn't facing them alone anymore. Of course, there were still challenges. Her friends occasionally teased her about dating someone younger, though their teasing was good-natured. "You're living your best life," one of them joked during lunch one afternoon. "We should all be so lucky," she laughed, shaking her head. "It's not about age," she replied. "It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better. Not because they demand it, but because you want to be." Her friend raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Wow, that sounds serious." "It is," she admitted, but not in a scary way, more like a hopeful way. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, he reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "You know," he said, his tone thoughtful, "I never imagined I'd find someone like you, someone who gets me, supports me, and challenges me to grow. I'm really thankful for that." Her eyes softened, touched by his sincerity. "Same here," she murmured. "And honestly, I think I needed this. I needed someone who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and letting the weight of their words sink in. Love, she realized, wasn't about fireworks or grand declarations. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other despite the imperfections. It was about building something strong enough to weather storms, but gentle enough to cherish the calm. A year later, standing in her kitchen on a sunny spring morning, she reflected on how much had changed. The house looked different now, brighter, cozier, filled with laughter and shared memories. Her kids were growing up, and though they teased her endlessly about her new boyfriend, she could see the affection in their eyes. As for him, he had become such an integral part of their lives that imagining it without him felt impossible. Life, she decided, was unpredictable. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, something or someone comes along and changes everything. In her case, it had been a chance encounter with a plumber who fixed more than just her sink. He fixed her faith in love, her belief in second chances, and her courage to open her heart again. And as she poured herself a cup of coffee, glancing out the window at the blooming flowers in her garden, she couldn't help but smile. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready.